Hegseth may also have to work to stay in the good graces of Donald Trump. Now, Trump is not known for backing down in the face of controversy, but Trump has also been very public about his distaste for people dealing with addiction. Trump himself does not drink, a decision he credits to watching his brother succumb to alcoholism at a young age. And Trump's position on addiction is not exactly one of empathy.
I've also, not only a brother, I've lost a lot of friends to addiction, drugs, alcohol, and there are other addictions also, frankly. It would be nice if people would do certain things and live certain ways, but they're just not able to break it. But you know the way that you solve the problem? Don't have them. When I look at a friend that can't stop smoking, I don't understand why it's hard to stop. I say the way you stay away, just don't drink. Just don't have it. If you don't have drugs, if you don't experience early on, you're not going to have a need for it. You're not going to have an addiction. If you don't drink alcohol, you're not going to have an addiction. You're not going to have this insatiable urge to have a drink.
That is how Donald Trump thinks about alcohol and addiction. Now, allegations about Hegseth's sexual assault and impropriety are unlikely to move Donald Trump, a man who himself was credibly accused of assault or harassment by more than 20 women. But the allegations about alcohol abuse, being hauled out of strip clubs and dragged back to hotel rooms and being wasted in public, what does that do to Trump's enthusiasm for Pete Hegseth? Trump has already lost one of his top picks when Congressman Matt Gaetz withdrew from consideration for Attorney General. And a few hours ago, Trump's pick to lead the Drug Enforcement Agency also withdrew his nomination due to conservative opposition to the COVID-19 policies he implemented as a Florida sheriff. That's according to the Washington Post. If Pete Hegseth's nomination goes the same way as those two, what does that mean for Trump's other controversial nominees? People like Kash Patel, Trump's pick for FBI director, who has explicitly threatened to use the department to go after Trump's enemies. Are there any of Trump's controversial nominations that are going to even make it to a Senate vote? And if they do they stand a better chance than John Tower? Joining me now is journalist and historian Garrett Graff. Also with me is Susan Glasser, staff writer at The New Yorker. It's great to have you both on tonight, and I'm eager to get your thoughts about what is a fairly kinetic situation here. Susan, you've studied and reported on Trump and his inner sanctum up close. And I kind of wonder how you think Trump's own attitudes and ideas about addiction and alcoholism may be factoring in, if at all, to the weakening support here for his defense secretary pick.
You know, that's a really interesting point you raise. I think, first of all, we should say Trump has obviously chosen maximally confrontational nominees for some of these key positions in the government. FBI director, you mentioned Kash Patel, Hegseth at the Defense Department, Tulsi Gabbard, the National Intelligence. Those are very radical choices. And what's interesting is that the conversation here is not about the radical and extreme views that they espouse. It's not about the agenda to essentially blow up large swaths of the national security apparatus of this country, but whether certain personal behaviors are such outliers that might be the only disqualifier. And, I think that it does appear that Hegseth's nomination is running into trouble. If this were anything other than Trump's Washington, I would say the signs are that he's never going to make it to a vote. But, Trump has chosen the path of confrontation. As you know, he doesn't like to back down from a fight. As long as there's a path forward, I think he'll pursue it. But, 6 senators, the math here is that they can only lose 4 senators if all the Democrats hold together. So the math doesn't look good when your own mother is being cited as one of the bullet points in the case against you. I heard that she's going to give an interview tomorrow to try to rebut that, but that email is pretty damning. My colleague Jane's reporting, it's not just about individual allegations of drinking. The man was not able to run very small veterans organizations as a management change. The Pentagon is the biggest one we have.
Yeah, I mean, I have to ask, Garrett, in terms of the character profile that's emerging here, I agree with Susan. Like so many of Trump's picks here are radicals. They're people that don't care about what the norms are, what the institutional history would dictate. This is kind of a different twist. Because I think, when you hear about someone being hauled off from the stage at a strip club, too sick or too drunk to take care of himself, in Trump's eyes, that may be seen as a sign of weakness. That's the opposite of what he has wanted from his other picks, who are, in his eyes, I think, strong enough to withstand the deep state, strong enough to withstand what he thinks of as a corrupted fourth estate, etc. This is a different kind of character flaw, I would say, in the eyes of Donald Trump. And I wonder how much that damages him. But it also goes to the point that maybe they should have done a better background check on this guy, Garrett. I mean, this is kind of why you vet your nominees, is it not? It just sort of seems like all of this is catching the man who chose him and the transition team that chose him by surprise.
I think we've seen right from the election day that Donald Trump is not choosing a cabinet and leadership for his administration in the way that presidential candidates and presidents-elect normally do. He's been casting a reality TV show. He likes people like Pete Hegseth because he thinks literally Pete looks good on TV. He's one of a large number of Fox News hosts and Fox contributors who have been nominated to senior positions in the second Trump administration. And that has all happened, very haphazardly. The plan to make Matt Gaetz the attorney general happened on a single plane ride up to Washington. Matt Gaetz was not on that list at the start of the plane ride, and at the end of the plane ride, he was the nominee. That's not the way that presidential administrations normally choose their most senior cabinet positions.
Susan, if the Hegseth nomination does not proceed forward, right? If he withdraws his name, a la Matt Gaetz, we also have his DEA pick, who's also withdrawn his name. I mean, it is telling a story, right? These nascent weeks of the Trump transition effort tell a story of failure. This is, I guess, how are you looking at this in the context of the larger, potentially even more controversial plans that Trump has announced he has for the country, but for which the details are scant?
Yeah, well, that's right. The details are scant, but the contours of what he has already pledged to do are actually sweeping, radical, and they can go forward even if a number of nominees, including this one, blow up on the tarmac. And I think that's the risk, right, is that we become so focused on, the overwhelming evidence of the unsuitability of one or two or three of these nominees. First of all, he seems to be taking the swarm approach, not with drones, but with nominees. And so, there's so many scandals, it's hard to know which one to focus on. And I think that's by the way, been part of Donald Trump's playbook from the very beginning, and I think it might be effective. So we're not even talking about nominating Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a vaccine denier, to be in charge of our public health apparatus. We're not even talking about Kash Patel, who has literally threatened and put out a list of 60 names, explicit names of people in the deep state. He went on Steve Bannon's podcast. He said he wants to, investigate and target all journalists who dared, to oppose them in the 2020 election, things like that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about one guy who allegedly abused alcohol and did all the other things that he did. And I think the swarm approach is something to pay attention to. Number one, that some of Trump's controversial nominees may get through, because historically speaking, the Senate has a very hard time standing up to president. And certainly this Republican Senate, there's not much evidence at all to suggest that they have the appetite to really, one after the other, vote down Donald Trump's nominees. So that, I think, is an important factor to consider here, is just that there's so many controversies that would help Trump.
Yeah, and Garrett, you have written, you have an op-ed right to this end about Kash Patel and how unsuitable and dangerous he is at the DOJ. We are going to take some time to talk about him. You call him more concretely dangerous and worrisome than many of Trump's other questionable choices. And by the time you wrote this, Pete Hegseth had already been his defense secretary pick. Can you talk about the way in which you see him, independent of whatever he might do to Trump's allies? And that ain't nothing. But what he could do to the department itself in terms of restructuring it and remaking it in his fashion, in his image, if you will.
Yeah. Donald Trump has chosen Kash Patel as his nominee for FBI director for a very explicit purpose, which is that he wants to weaponize the FBI against his political enemies. And the truth of the matter is that as a nation, we know exactly what that looks like. We know what a weaponized FBI looks like. It looks like what the FBI was in the late 1960s and early 1970s in the final years of J. Edgar Hoover's reign as FBI director. It looks like a bureau that abuses the civil rights and civil liberties of ordinary Americans, that it persecutes political enemies and helps political friends. Now, Congress, the American people, and the presidents of the 1970s recoiled from what that FBI looked like. And we've spent 50 years building a series of guardrails and norms and new procedures and term limits to ensure that the FBI is never able to be weaponized like that again. And now we have a nominee coming in, you were running some of that B-roll of Kash Patel before, who was explicitly participating in Trump political rallies. I mean, the idea of any of the people who have been atop the FBI in the last 50 years appearing at a presidential campaign rally is an anathema to the Bureau. And so to have someone who is not only not independent of the president, but actually specifically loyal to the president is a deeply worrisome thing to consider.
Yeah, especially when you look at, as you so helpfully do, if you articulate the sort of, or go through the history of FBI directors and the presidents they served, sometimes with great friction. That's kind of the point. Garrett Graff and Susan Glasser, thank you both for your time tonight. I appreciate you guys both.